Hey, Vlad here, devinside.com. Welcome to another video. Today we're going to see how easy it is to manage your environment with a nice little tool called direnv, which stands for Directory Environment. In case you're new here, you should probably know that this is mostly a Scala channel, but feel free to subscribe anyway. And if you've been here before, don't worry, the data juggling playlist is not over yet. In fact, this video is a prerequisite for the upcoming part, so let's get right to it. As in most of my videos, I'm using an Ubuntu 18.04 virtual machine, and I'm using Windows as a host, and Windows has a feature called virtual desktops, and it has shortcuts which allow me to easily switch between Windows like this and back to Ubuntu like that. Alright, now I already included a tiny crash course about environment variables in the video about installing the graalvm, but in case you haven't seen it, let me give you a quick summary. Same as variables in a program, environment and shell variables allow you to have variables on the operating system level, so they're baked in the operating system, which allows other programs to access them, which 99% of the time means reading from them. Very rarely a program would need to modify an environment variable. Environment variables are accessible throughout your entire operating system. In fact, in that other crash course, I wasn't very specific about the difference between the shell variables and the environment variables. So let's just open the terminal and play around with them. Let's switch into the temp folder real quick so that we know where we are. There's nothing inside. All right, so you declare the shell variable just like this, just by typing shell underscore key. And if you've seen my ZSH video, then you know that I have a plugin that basically shows me the entire history. So I'm going to do this. Okay, so you have like key value. You try to avoid the spaces around the equal sign. You're trying to avoid the spaces in your value. If you have a space in your value, then you need double quotes or at least single quotes. Basically the same rules as for the shell apply. The whole 9 yards. And with environment variables, you do exactly the same thing. You just prepare the whole thing with the export keyword and pressing Alt D. If you've seen my ZSH video, then you know all of these shortcuts. Environment like this. Did I type it wrong? Yeah, no, it looks fine. Okay, and over here, environment value. Okay, and the way you dereference them is with a dollar symbol. So you can do echo shell key like this and echo environment key shell environment value. Okay, so you have shell value, you have the environment value. Now what you need to know is that the difference between them is that the shell variables are accessible only within your shell, even not in your in the subshells. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to create a script. I'm going to open it with Vim, but you can open it with any editor you want, and I'm basically going to go in there and just say that this is going to be a script like this. So we're going to do /bin/bash, and we're going to do exactly the same thing, right? So we're going to have shell key and echo environment key like this. Let's exit. Let's make it executable by doing this. Okay, it is executable. Let's try and run it. And there we go. We see only the environment variable. We don't see, the environment value. We don't see the shell value because every script that you run, it runs in a subshell, which means that if we were to start another shell, it could be ZSH. Again, I'm using ZSH, but let's just for fun, let's start bash. Okay, so if I do the same thing as before, echo shell key, it's not going to be visible, but if I do environment key, maybe I even get auto completion, yes I do, the value is still there, which means that the environment variables are more useful than the shell variables and therefore they're used more often. However, even they don't transcend to other shells without some extra help. So if I do Control D and I do Shift and F2, I'm using Biobu with tmux inside. I have videos about all of this, but basically this is another shell. Okay, so if I go in here and I do echo shell key like this, or echo environment key, come on, environment key, oh no, not like that, environment key like this. As you can see, we don't see either of them. Now obviously there are ways to solve this. There are multiple files that your operating system loads when it boots. For example, one of them is this one. So if you go to etc environment, okay, so you can put it over here, right? As you can see, there's already one variable declared in there. You could also put it into etc profile like this. As you can see, a bunch of stuff there. Just go into the bottom and add them. But the proper way to add them is to go into your home folder and put it into your own profile. As you can see, we don't even need the sudo keyword because this is your own file. Now this is mine. Let's create a bit more space. If we go down to the bottom, as you can see, I have a couple of exports over here, for example, for the visual one and for the editor. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to go and I'm going to add the same things in there. So we're going to go and say that this is going to be a shell key. Okay, we're going to do shell value, and we're going to do export environment key equals environment value, like this. So if I exit and if we're trying to do the echo dollar shell key, it's not there. Echo dollar environment key, oh man, muscle memory. All right, environment key, as you can see, they're not there because we need to source the profile or to log out. Okay, so if we do source profile, then now we can do echo shell key, it's there, and echo environment key, and it is also there. However, every time we open a new shell like this, for example, they won't be there, neither of them. All right, so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to close all of these shells and I'm going to log out real quick because I'm using a VM. It is super easy. Log out, and it's going to take a couple of seconds, and log back in like this. So let me open the terminal, and if I just go up, we still don't see the shell key, right? But we do see the environment key, right? We didn't need to source the profile, right? Which also means that if we start another shell, and if we do a shell key, doesn't exist, environment key, it exists. So everything works exactly the same, but now every shell that I open, it will have access to this environment key. Okay, so let's just do that, for example, and let's just go up. Environment key is there, but the shell key is not. Now, this approach is clearly not ideal. You have to log out and log back in, and you're polluting your dot profile with a bunch of environment variables. Over time it's going to grow. And the most important downside is that you can't use the same key with different values for multiple projects. Meet direnv, which solves exactly this problem. It is called directory environment. So what it allows you to do is it allows you to create environment variables that are loaded only when you access a directory, right? So basically when you cd into the directory, and it also unloads them when you leave the directory, which is really awesome. By the way, it also works on all operating systems. I have only tried it on Ubuntu though. Okay, now direnv is not the only kit around the block. There are many others. In fact, if you've seen my video about ZSH, I showed you a plugin which is built into all my ZSH called dotenv, and it works like a charm, but it's pretty basic. For instance, it doesn't unload the environment variables when you leave the directory. All right, now let me go back to my profile and remove that stuff from there. It clearly shouldn't be there. Right, so just this one, and yeah, we don't need these empty lines. Okay, like this. And also I'm gonna log out and log back in real quick. Log out. All right, log back in. All right, so let's open the terminal and let's do echo environment key. It's not there. And also shell key. Also not there. Now, before I show you how to install and configure direnv, I would like to highly advise you to do a couple of other things before that. Direnv can load your variables from multiple places. It's very flexible and very configurable, but by default, it loads them from the .envrc file. And by the way, similar to all the other RC files, RC stands for run commands. The difference between envrc and all the others is that you will have multiple .envrc files, right? One per directory. Now, since you never should commit your environment variables to your version control systems, which these days pretty much means Git and GitHub, we're going to go and create a global.gitignore file and also let Git know where it is. Now you can create it wherever you like and call it however you like, and then allow Git to know where it is. But by default there is a location. So if we go into .config /git, if it exists, okay, it doesn't. Okay, so config exists, so we can take git, and we can also take well, actually no, it's just git. Okay, so in here, if we're going to have a file called ignore, just like this. Okay, so this is the default location where git is going to look into. Okay, so all we're going to do is we're going to put in there .envrc, and we're also going to put .env, and I'm going to explain why a bit later in the video. Okay, also if you don't have a global gitignore file, there is actually a file which is recommended by GitHub. In fact, if I go back into my Windows, I already have it open, so I'm gonna have this link down in the description, but basically you can just copy this entire file. It's basically like all the binaries, some packages like 7-zip, it's basically like the common practice to have like this global gitignore file. Okay, let me go back, let me save this. By the way, if you're not happy with the default location, this is not a Git tutorial, but it's going to take just a second to show you how to configure it. If you want to have this file somewhere else, then you can just do a git config and then global, and then you can do core.exclude file like this. Okay, and then you just give it a location. For example, you could say something like in my home folder there's going to be a file called global.gitignore. Okay, and this thing is going to go and it will put it into your git config. Okay, so in git config, the last thing that it just did, it put that thing in there. See, core exclude file. By the way, notice that it expanded this. You can actually go and replace it with a tilde. Like this, it's still gonna work. Okay, but in my case, I'm actually gonna remove it. In fact, if you do it like this, then you're basically replacing the default location, right? So that file that we just created is not gonna be looked up anymore. Okay, so I'm gonna remove that. Okay, so basically I just reverted that change that we just did. Now we're still not ready to install direnv. We could, but the thing is that after we install direnv, we would also need to hook it into our shell, right? Because the shell is the one that switches into the directory, right? And then the shell will send the callback to direnv so that direnv knows that it needs to load stuff, and the same for leaving. Now, if we go to the direnv website, which is just direnv.net, if we scroll down a little bit, we're going to see this here. In fact, let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, I'm going to see hook direnv into your shell. So you just click there, and you see, the setup for all the kinds of shells. I'm using ZSH, so all it wants you to do is to take this and put it into your ZSH-RC file. And the reason I'm doing this before I install direnv is to show you the following. So if I go over here and I open my ZSH-RC file, and I go to the very bottom, right, as you can see, I'm not a Vim expert, so I'm going to do it like manually. I'm just going to press down. Okay, so we're at the very, very bottom. So if I just paste it like this, okay, then look what's going to happen every time as I open a new shell. It's going to say command not found. Command not found. Now, since I'm a big fan of synchronizing my dot files, and I have a video about this, you can go and check it out. I like the tools that are not installed yet. I like them to fail silently, because what I usually do is when I set up, a new virtual machine, the first thing I'm doing is I'm synchronizing my dot files before I even install all the other tools. And so I don't want to see that stuff. Okay, it's very, very easy to solve. You just go into your ZSH-RC file or your bash.rc or whatever, and you basically do like one of these similar things. Okay, so you just go in there and you just basically make sure that this command exists, right? So basically you do an if, in there's going to be some condition, and then you're going to do then, right? And only in this case, let me actually use tab. Okay, only in this case we're going to run the command. Okay, and what we have over here is basically just a dollar symbol like this, and the parentheses, and inside of the parentheses we're literally saying command -v, and then in this case direnv. Basically it makes sure that only if this command exists, then we're going to run that. Okay, so let me exit that. Come on, exit that. So I'm starting a new shell, and I did something wrong. Yep, I did something wrong. Let me go and check it out. All right, let's maybe have a space. Maybe we need a space over here. Space here. Come on. Space here. And space here. Okay, let me check. Command have nv, direnv, then. It looks right. Looks right. Let's go and try this again. Okay, like this, like that, and there we go. So we're starting a new shell, but it doesn't explode even though direnv is not installed yet. Okay, let's exit that. Let's exit that. Let's go to the home folder. Let me press Control L like this. Cool. So we're almost ready to install it. Let's just for fun create a folder where we're gonna play around with this. Okay, so I'm gonna call it dev direnv playground like this. Okay, I'm just gonna go in there. I'm gonna open it with Visual Studio Code because I'm tired of Vim for today. All right, and inside of it, we're just gonna go and once it finally starts. Oh man, Electron takes forever. All right, so we're just gonna go and create a file called script.sh, and we're gonna put exactly the same thing as before in there, like this, right? /bin /bash. Okay, echo shell key and echo environment key like this. Okay, and actually from now on we will be able to use the built-in terminal over here. Okay, so we can do a change mode. Yeah, basically exactly the same thing. Okay, let's see. Yeah, okay, now it's executable. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go and create a .envrc file, right? So this is the file that the direnv is always going to load, and because it can run arbitrary commands, we can actually do something like this, running commands like this. Okay, right, and inside of here we can do shell key equals shell value, and environment key equals environment value like this. Great. Let's also create an empty .env file, and I will show you why a bit later. I just want to show you for now that once we're going to initialize the Git repository, that these files are going to be ignored. This is pretty much all I want to show you. In fact, let's actually go and do this right now. Let's do g init, and I can do g because I'm using zsh. Okay, and I'm not sure if you can see this, but these two files are grayed out, right? So they're part of the git ignore, and this is exactly why I wanted to create the project even before we're actually going and installing direnv. All right. So we're in this directory and I can press enter, right? But if we try to do something like echo shell key, we're not going to see anything, and echo environment key, we're also not going to see anything because we don't even have direnv installed. Once we actually have it installed, it will see that there is a .envrc file in there, and well, rc stands for run commands, so it's just going to go and start running all of these commands, and then we should be able to echo these two variables. Now comes the installation part, which honestly is a shit show. Direnv is a teeny tiny little binary which just needs to be on your path, so it should be in all of the package managers, right? Like app, for example. So you should be able to say sudo add install -y direnv, right? And in fact, it isn't there, but it is so outdated. Even though I'm on the latest LTS version of the basically most prominent Linux operating system, which is Ubuntu, right? Ubuntu 18.04 is currently, the latest stable release, and it's the most used operating system. However, if you go there, if we go to the page, right, we actually have a button here which says in repositories, which I actually have open over there. But basically the latest version currently is 2.21.2, and as you can see right now, it's only published for AUR, whatever the hell this is. I don't even know how to pronounce it. And Fedora. Homebrew. So if you're in the Mac, just run Homebrew. There's also Linux Brew. I should play around with this. I did not know that it exists. I think I'm going to start using it from now on. Right, so basically if we go down, we see that Ubuntu 18.04 has an ancient version, okay? Even Ubuntu 20.04 has a relatively recent version, right? And it's not even out yet. No worries, if you're new here, you should probably know that I have a subdomain called install, right? So if you go to install.dotenv, it will redirect you to my GitHub page, and it will search for all the repositories that are starting with install dash or install hyphen. And you could even do install devinside.com / something like dir, right? And now it's going to look for install dir, and it's going to find this. Okay, all of my install repositories are designed in such a way that I'm going to zoom in real quick. They just basically copy paste these two lines, or you can also specify the version, and we'll just download the script, make it executable, and run it. So I'm going to copy these two lines, and before I paste them into my terminal, I'm going to go into the script so that you can see that it doesn't do anything magical, right? So basically, it's doing some stuff with a version. Then it basically just goes to the GitHub page of direnv and just downloads this binary. It puts it into user local bin. Okay, right? It makes it executable, blah blah blah. Nothing major. Okay, in fact, if we go back to here, you can also specify the version. So if you click on version, you will actually end up on this GitHub page with all the versions. So you see exactly these versions. So my script is basically just going and downloading this this file. Okay, right. So I copied these lines. I'm gonna go over here. I'm going to paste them over here. It doesn't need to be in the same folder. In fact, I'm going to open a different terminal. I'm going to my home folder, just paste this in, press enter my password, and in a couple of seconds, I'm going to have this direnv in my user local build folder. It says direnv is now on the path, shows you the version. It also says don't forget to hook it into your shell, gives you this link. Okay, so if you go to user local bin, and I'm going to do L, we're going to see this is exactly this binary. Okay, great. So now if I press enter over here, okay, maybe I should close the terminal because it doesn't know that direnv was installed. Okay, so if I open the terminal, it should now say, hold on, let me actually create more space so that we see this. Like this, this should be enough, okay? It says direnv arrow, that this file, .envrc, this one, is blocked. You should run direnv allow to approve its content. Now, this is a security mechanism built by, built into direnv, so it's done on purpose. The thing is that RC, again, stands for run commands. So one of these commands could be, go and delete, your entire partition, okay? So remember, you might be just cloning some repository from somewhere, from people you don't know. Maybe they don't know better, and there will be a .envrc file with, which will basically do a bunch of damage. So basically, it forces you to actually go in there and see what actually changed, right? So basically notice the changes. Every time you change something over here, it's going to notice it, and it's going to prompt you with exactly the same thing, okay? And then you're going to see, oh no, I know what I'm doing, okay? And you do direnv allow, And now you can see it says loading this file, this envrc, and it says running commands because we have this echo in there. Okay, and also, if for some reason, later, you're playing around, you're hunting some bug, maybe there's some issue with the environment variables, and for some reason you want to stay in this folder, but you don't want this thing to be loaded, you can also always deny it, right? direnv deny, like this. Okay, so now they're not there. Okay, but for now, let's go and allow it. Okay, so it loaded that, which means that we can do echo shell key, and we can see there's nothing there, but the environment variable, oh come on, the environment variable actually is there. Why is it not there? What is happening? Oh, it doesn't work because I forgot the export keyword. Why didn't you tell me? Okay, so but this is a good example. Okay, so if I press enter now, it will notice that there's a change in the .envrc file, and it will say, hey, there was a change, so we need to do direnv allow, like this. Okay, and now you can see it exported this environment key. Okay, so now we can actually go and do the echo, right? And also, as you can see, it doesn't work with the shell keys, and because it's an environment variable, it's gonna work for the script as well, right? So if we just run the script, okay, we're gonna see the environment value, right? Even though it's in a subshell, the environment, the value is still there, right? Which also means that if we leave this directory, right? So if I do cd ... for example, like this, it's gonna say unloading, right? So if I do echo environment key, it's not there. I switch back in, and again, it is there, as you see over here. Now let me go switch back to this file. Okay, now usually I trust my team, and so I sort of, I don't want to allow things every time something is changing there, because every time something is changing there, it's because I did it, right? Because my team has proper gitignore files. Nothing comes in here that I don't know about it, right? So, and it turns out that I can have my cake and eat it too. direnv ships with a thing that it calls the standard library. It's just basically a bunch of bash functions, or in my case ZSH functions, but it's basically bash, but ZSH is compatible. Okay, and one of them, in fact, let me actually show it to you. So I can actually do direnv help. Okay, and one of these commands is direnv stdlib, right? So basically standard library. So I can do direnv standard library, right? And basically just shows me this entire file. Okay, so I can go into the history mode, and I can scroll up. Actually, I can search for .env. Okay, so .env is one of these commands, right? So if you know bash, you can read this thing, but basically what it allows you to do is it allows you to have a .env file, right? So this is what it says: load the .env file into the current environment. Okay, so basically, like all of these things that are being called the standard library are the commands that you can use in your env.rc file. So for example, over here you can go and say please also load the .env file. Okay, so for example, we can copy this, and we can put this over here, and we can say that this is the shell key from env, and this is an environment key from env, like this. Okay, and let's also do it over here as well, from env. Let's call it .env, like this. All right, so now basically for the last time, we're going to go and say, okay, allow, because we added this .env, so this file changed. Okay, so we go and say allow. Okay, and now we're going to see that there's a problem, right? So this is not an RC file anymore. .env is not an RC file, so it means that it cannot run commands anymore. Okay, so we need to remove this one. Okay, like this. All right, enter. Okay, so now as you can see, it loaded the environment key. It loaded the environment key from env, but it also loaded the shell key, which means that if we're dealing with the .env file, which is what I usually prefer, then we also have access to the shell key. Well, basically, it's not a shell key anymore. Actually, it's called shell key from file. So I called it shell key, but it's not a shell key anymore. Basically, what it allows you to do is it allows you to have a .env file with a bunch of key value pairs. You don't need the export keyword anymore. And also, like usually, I don't even have anything in my .envrc file. Usually, that's all I have. I just have this. I just have .env, and I have this. And why do I have this? Is because I'm going to allow it for the last time. Okay, so now I can actually go over here and say key 1 equals value 1, but value 1 like this. Okay, notice that I'm going to press enter. It's not going to tell me that anything changed, right? Nothing changed, but I have access to this key. You can see it over here, key 1. Okay, echo key 1 like this. In fact, what I usually do, like this is the virtual machine where I record stuff, so I'm synchronizing my dot files, but right now I'm not in the latest version. And in my latest version I actually have an alias, right? So if I go and create it like this, I call it DI, which stands for direnv init, okay, because I use it like all the time, okay. And all this alias is doing, it echoes .env into a file called .envrc, which is going to create, right? And then it is going to, and then it is going to touch a file called .env, right? So it will create an empty env, and it will also allow everything, right? Direnv allow, right? So usually I have exactly this alias. I'm going to press enter. Okay, so what I can do now is we can play around with this, right? So I can create a folder called some project. Okay, there is nothing in here, okay, but I just press di, I just put in di and it says loading .envrc file, right? Because now I have the the .envrc file in there, and I have the empty .env file, and they're git ignored because because we have the global gitignore file. Works like a charm, right? So usually I have this alias, and every time I clone a repository from somewhere, I just type in di. If I need to work with environment variables, super easy. Now we're pretty much done with the video. I'm going to show you a couple of other things that are in this standard library. Only the ones that I find useful. One is called edit, right? So if I type in direnv edit like this, it will open my by default configured terminal. As you kept seeing in my .profile, it's Vim. So it basically opens Vim, and it opens the envrc file, right, which is exactly this one. Okay, so I can go in there and do something like blah. Okay, so as you can see, this is exactly the same file. Okay, let me remove this. Okay, so if we go again into my .profile, we're going to see at the very bottom, I'm doing export editor equals user bin Vim, which means that for this particular project, right, so just for fun, we're just having fun now, I can go into my .env file, okay, and we don't need all of this crap anymore, right? So I can just do, and let's say that only when I'm inside of this directory, I can say that my editor is going to be Visual Studio Code, just for fun. Okay, which code? Okay, which code? Okay, so which code basically will tell me where Visual Studio Code is, right? And it's in snap bin code. Okay, as you can see, there is also this tilde over here, which means that the editor variable, the editor environment variable was already there, but it actually changed now, right? So let me actually demonstrate this to you again. So if you have key 1, value 1, like this, if I press enter, over here we have a plus, right? So it's a completely new environment variable, but this one was changed, right? So this means that if I do direnv edit, it will now open it with Visual Studio Code. There we go. See, it jumped over there, which is kind of cool, but it's also it's just fun. All right, the other thing that I'm going to show you is that you can also go into your .envrc file, okay, and you can do something like this. You can say path _add, and you just give it some directory, subdir, like this. Okay, so now if I press enter, it changed, so we need to allow it. Okay, and as you can see, it also changed the path variable. Okay, so if we do echo path, by the way, we actually don't need, we're not going to create any more files. Okay, so we're going to do it like this. Let's actually echo it again. Okay, so as you can see, it went and it added this directory into the path, which is really awesome, because now if I leave, it's not going to be there, right? It says unloading echo path. It's not there anymore. This subdir thing is not there. Hold on. Let me actually do it like this. Okay, so before it was over here, now it's not there anymore, right? So this is super useful. For example, if you want to use, I don't know, let's say you want to use GraalVM only in one of your projects, but in all of the other projects, you want to keep using your your OpenJDK or whatever, right? Super useful. Again, if we go back to the directory like this, as you can see, we have this thing again, echo path. It's back there. Really awesome. The last thing that I'm going to show you, which is in the standard library, there are actually more things. You can go and check it out for yourself on the website. But the last one that I find, it's kind of weird, but I sort of can imagine a use case for it. You can make it watch a file for changes, right? Now, don't get confused. Like, this file is not going to contain environment variables, right? This is going to be your own file. I don't know, your README, for example. For some reason, if you change the README, then it will notice it and it will reload the .envrc file. Okay. So if we have this, okay, let me press enter. Okay, it says, it was there, allow. Okay, so if I press enter now, it's gonna, it's gonna see that there are no changes. Okay, however, if I have a file called, I just said like a couple of minutes ago that we're not gonna create more files. Oh man, okay, so we're gonna go and create some file like this. Okay, it's empty, right? But now if I press enter, see, it reloaded the .envrc file. Okay, and every time there will be a change to this file, it will reload the .envrc file. Okay, I can imagine that it could be useful for some use cases, but still, I find it kind of weird. But anyway, as I already said, the direnv standard library has a couple of more functions. You can go and look in there. Also, you can have like a global.envrc file. One last thing that I'm going to mention is that the website actually contains a wiki. In fact, let's actually go and check it out. So there is a wiki somewhere. Wiki, yeah. So there's a community wiki, and also there are min pages over here. So you can go and check it out. One of the few things that it mentions is that you can run into issues with tmux, for example, or with Docker. I didn't run into any issues, but if you do, go here, check out what it says. It says it is recommended to wrap tmux to avoid issues with environment loading. Didn't have any issues so far, so I haven't played with it, but you go check it out for yourself. Cool. I think I said everything that I wanted to say. Now go and have fun taming your 12-factor apps. For now, as always, it's been Vlad, devinside.com. Don't forget to like this video if you did, subscribe if you want to improve the developer inside you, and if you learned something today, consider support me on Patreon. But most importantly, take care.